Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Randy Veitenheimer. First, a couple of announcements. Our website is forbiddenknowledge.news. It's also the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, where you find some of your favorite podcasts featured. Forbidden Knowledge News is always available on Rokfin, Odyssey, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Our social media is Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Those links are in the description. Rokfin is where you get our premium content. You also get all the premium content from all the wonderful creators on Rokfin for only $10 a month. That link is in the description as well. You can go to rokfin.com/FKN+. Today I want to welcome back to the show Randy Veitenheimer. He is a host of Gaia's original series, Quantum Effect, as well as a featured guest in Undisclosed. He has also appeared in Open Minds with Regina Meredith and Beyond Belief with George Norrie. He is an energy healer and a member of the Potawatomi tribe. He learned at a very young age the power of plants and vibration in the healing process. At around the age of 19, he began his in-depth studies of martial arts, which led to other forms of energy transfer and healing practices from world-renowned masters and teachers. He developed a healing method he calls creative energetic health. Randy, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you. It's been a while since you've been on. Today, I think we're going to dive deeper into the true nature of how we really interact with all the energy and information surrounding us at all times. We're going to discuss some things that you're currently looking at, like biohacking and field information flows and interferences. We're going to find out all about that, but since it's been so long, remind the audience a bit about your background and what led you down the path you're on.
It's I think there was a country and western song that said, "God bless the crooked road that led me to you." I think that's true for everyone, and mine might have been more crooked than most. But at a very early age, I mean, 7, 8 years old, I became fascinated with physics, and in particular nuclear physics. Kind of an odd thing for an 8-year-old, but by 13 it was laser physics, and by 15 or 16 it was quantum physics. And so it's kind of like catching a cold you can't get rid of. You're continually fighting with it or engaged with it, is the way I refer to it. And as you go along, you start learning the language. And if you keep going, you start learning that the language is also present in everything from spirituality to psychology to just all kinds of things. So one of the things I do is what I call cultural appropriation of quantum physics language. And when I started doing that was like 25 years ago. I was at a science and consciousness conference, and I started talking about that in that way. And they basically all thought I was crazy. And now it's commonplace. It's commonplace to talk about these things. And so I think that's the typical path. At first you're crazy, and then they kind of accept it, and then like they just pass you by and forget where it came from, right?
Yeah.
But those were fascinating conversations because there were all kinds of people at these conferences, and one of the things, there were Russian physicists, and they were a lot farther along than we were in the application of some of these things, and basically it's applied consciousness. And Dr. Bill Tiller was a friend of mine, and he got all enamored with it. I wrote some books about it and stuff, and I used to do some consulting with him. And that's the ability of anybody to influence their own selves and to influence everybody else. So if we keep going, we come up with like How to Win Friends and Influence People. That was a book back in the 60s. And then now we're at like How to Be a Friend to Yourself. And how to influence yourself actually becomes a phenomena of quantum physics. It's taking everything outside and actually trying to find out what the inside looks like. So, without being too vague, this gets into everything from meditation to spirituality to whatever, because everything you can influence outside you is like done by something inside you. So, so if we take that and keep going, we come up with like, well, the human body and human life is a great like instruction manual. It has all the faculties to be able to explore what it means to have consciousness or to be spiritual or all these other things, right?
Right.
And so then it becomes a matter of avoiding the traps. The traps become ideas. They become memes. They become viral thoughts, literally. And we participate in all that. And so at some point, you start coming back to the idea, and especially in meditation, that maybe you could have an influence on yourself. And so I started studying martial arts at a very early age in Kung Fu. And martial arts is very interesting if you progress beyond the fighting. It's very much about internal development. It's about the ability to influence yourself. It's about the ability to control your own blood pressure, to control your heartbeat, control your respiration. And you've got the ideal subject, yourself. So, but these things are require a lot of time and a lot of practice. And so most people today want a pill. It's like, give me a pill. And of course, that's where we are in what I call biohacking, very popular right now. The idea you can modify yourself. Well, in Kung Fu and in Kundalini Yoga and a lot of other spiritual practices, I've studied a bunch of it over the last 50 years, is the difference is I decided that every time they'd say you could do this or this could be done, I took an interest in it and decided, let me practice that to the point that I develop a skill set to be able to influence my own thoughts, my own energy flows, my own heart rate, things like that. You do it by learning to do it to others. And one of the things about healing is like when you're doing healing practices, which I do on other people, it's like, excuse me a minute, let me work on that on myself, right? Let me see what the effect of that is on myself. So now back to quantum physics, we get into, well, what are you using? What's the operating kind of like tools, or I mean, this is where the language goes crazy. You're using your own energy field to influence others. You're using your thoughts or emotions to power that. And somebody recently, very famous, said, well, if you want to make a change in the world, use your emotions. And like, that's the most horrible way to progress that I can think of, but that's my opinion. Okay. And the reason is you can't sustain an emotion. I mean, a lot of people can hang on to one. You can be sad for years or mad, whatever, but you just can't do it. And so basically your electromagnetic field, you can increase by all kinds of practices, breathing, pranayama, just a dozen different things. And, but the idea is the bigger the energy field, the more influence you have. Now, we know that. We call that a charismatic person. Some of them run for president. and so, but the idea is that large electromagnetic field is something that is you're capable of utilizing like a tool, right? You can apply it to yourself. So biohacking tries to find all these different formulas. I've gone down that path. I've made a bunch of formulas that have different benefits. One of them was to be able to increase your etheric field from about 2 inches out to about 14. And it tends to work, and it's been around in alchemy and different things forever. And that's monatomic gold, or just different things that you can put together. So people are like, you have the baby boomers, 75 million baby boomers. What are they most interested in? Being younger, looking younger, right? Give me cosmetics, give me something. And now we get into biohacking. We're going to call that stem cells. We're going to call that all kinds of things from CRISPR technology, Cas9 to whatever. And so that's kind of the current state of affairs. But I tend to go in the other direction, which is the internal direction, meaning you can influence your hormonal balance. You can influence your oxygen rates, your absorption rates of oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, all these different things can all be influenced by your ability to learn to interact with your own self. It's the best tool in the universe, the human body. So, and the best thing to interact with that is your own consciousness, as long as it's your own consciousness. And there becomes a problem. It's if I'm talking too much, interfere.
No, I wanted to stop you for a minute because I want to go back to quantum physics. You had mentioned a couple of times that you had introduced some ideas to the public consciousness before we even really heard about this from mainstream quantum physics. What are some of the most exciting things that are coming out now in quantum sciences that you may have had ideas about in the past? And is there anything that they haven't got to yet that maybe you have had some theories about already?
Oh, yeah. The problem is when you get ahead of people, you're considered crazy.
Right. Yeah.
And so I may have joined those ranks at an early age. I don't know. I don't know, about 25 years ago, they came out with, in physics, that there was more than 3 or 4 dimensions. And not to mention names, Michio, whatever, he was standing there with a bunch of us were standing around, and I said, oh, they're going to introduce the idea there's 11 dimensions. And I said, didn't you learn to count any higher at an early age? And of course, that didn't make me popular, and I'm not supposed to be that way, but I am occasionally. Right? And so the answer is dimensionality is, first of all, bad language. So when we change that language to intersection, we get a better idea what's going on, right? So a quantum intersection means an intersection of energy or information. And in this case, energy slowed down is information. Information slowed down is matter. So this all ties back to, like, how do you influence the body, right? If you can change the energy levels, which we can, then you can change the information flow. So one of the things in genetics is we have infinite amount of genes, we'll call it. Most of them are what we call unexpressed. So if there's no energy flowing through that gene, think of it as a template. Then you don't get that outcome. We carry templates for all kinds of things, right? I have brown eyes. Some people have green or blue. That's a template. Energy, information flowing, or energy flows through that template. And the outcome, you look at the outcome. So one of the things we do in reality is don't question outcomes, right? We're looking at it. So, but we can question, well, what is the information? What's the energy flowing through that template? Where did it come from? My mom, my dad? Does it come outside of me? Is it epigenetic in nature? Is it collective consciousness being an expression of, physical size or temperament? Or it just goes on forever. Probably more than we have time to talk about. But if we look at that, now we have the ability, remember, internal, ourself, using our own energy, that we could influence whether that gene expresses or not. Well, this is similar to what they're trying to do mechanically through the CRISPR technology and the introduction of genes from outside to making a change inside us. And so we have outside to inside. And what I work on is inside to inside. Like you can change it yourself. So that's some of the things I work on, been teaching, some of the stuff I've been
Well, that's
following
probably, dangerous information to introduce, because then we won't be relying on pharmaceuticals and the medical industry and daddy government as much anymore. We can heal ourselves. So I'm sure that those ideas are a threat to some people out there.
Oh, yeah. 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 One of the things I teach is the concept of a baseline. What's your baseline? And what that means is like, first of all, how you are you. That's one of the basic things. And through a process of calibration or being able to discern the truth, you can come up with a number of like how Randy is Randy, how Chris is Chris. But we can extend that again. And once you come up with what I call a basic truth, you can extend it. So I wrote a little book called Why Wait? Not published, I just give it to my students. But baseline your caloric intake, baseline your caloric expression, how much you burn off. And in that way, you can avoid a million different diets that are out there. So, because if a diet worked, it works for some people, but it doesn't work for everyone. So that's the subjective nature. That's why you need to study yourself, right? How do I take in calories? How do I burn them, right? And then if you want to make changes, you at least have an idea of something to measure from, a baseline, right? Even in your own consciousness. And so back to biohacking and everybody wanting to be younger, hormones have a big effect on how you operate. We could think of it as the fuel. It's an additive to whatever fuel we take in. So the basic human structure operates off oxygen, carbon, glucose, a couple other things, or glandular secretions. That's it. The same thing. You could basically find out where you are and then what you can do to change that. Okay. Without the need of going to things from outside you. And as an example, one of my martial arts teachers was in LA in the 70s. And when he came to this country, he opened up a health food store, vitamins, supplements. And one day he said, I realized I was taking like 400 different supplements in a month. and with the realization comes the truth. He goes, I realized every one of those supplements and vitamins, and here we go, pharmaceuticals, everything is written in such a way that you go, oh my God, I need that. Mm-hmm. and then you go around the world, people are operating at, let's say, a high efficiency, and they're not taking any of that. It's like the Inuit up in Alaska. There's not a green plant within 1,000 miles, yet they have normal vitamin C levels and this, that, and the other. So there goes all diets out the window.
Yeah, right.
And then the same thing is, well, if you have a metabolic level, like when you're 16, let's say, why don't you have that when you're 60? And then here we go into being able to go through things. But again, if you can't discern the truth of it, then you have to believe whatever they write down and say, take this, take that, whatever. Right. So,
well,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say we're living in very interesting, encouraging times, because this is being realized by people. So it makes me happy that people are seeing through this and looking for alternatives and listening to folks like yourself. So that's a good thing that we're seeing right now. I do want to go back a minute to what you were saying about outside possible spiritual influences that we have to be cautious of, these energies that could possibly affect us that may not have our best interest in mind.
Oh, yeah. There was a 3rd or 4th century Chinese philosopher, Wang Po, okay? And Wang Po wrote the following: reality is reality. What you think about reality and how you feel about reality is not reality. And welcome to Facebook and Twitter. And
yeah,
you're not getting reality. you're getting how people think about it and how they feel about it, which is highly entertaining, right? And so one of the things, back to intersections and dimensions, they started in, okay, they got up to 11, and basically the conversation got dropped after that. In other words, they came to realize that there's a lot more than 11, which is where I was back in the 80s, right? That there's more going on here. And the problem is, like in the electromagnetic spectrum, we occupy such a small portion of it. Both in our interactions and our receptivity. So it doesn't mean the rest of that spectrum doesn't exist. But when we go through daily life, most people ignore it. They ignore the fact that dogs can hear things that we can't, or cats can see things we can't. And so those are realities too, but most people don't participate in them. They don't do things to try to expand their hearing or their sensitivity and their different senses. And again, that's back to martial arts. We were taught all that. We were taught hot and cold and, up and down and this, that, and the other is exercises to be able to develop strength in those areas. In other words, be able to be more sensitive. Well, being more sensitive is to be more interactive. That's it. So our reality, in my thinking, represents about 30% of actually what goes on. And I think Jay Weidner was talking the other day about there's a lot more going on around us than we're aware of. There's a lot more, we'll call them people, things, entities, aliens, spirit attachments, non-local consciousness. It goes on forever. Mm-hmm. And people are influenced by that. And so all that we lump together I will lump together as the field. And I did an interview on a book review on Asimov the other day, and the lady asked me, like, well, what's the field? And I said, well, nobody's really defined it, but I will. And that is all information, all energy, all information, all consciousness combined. So, well, that opens up everything that comes to you, comes out of the field. You don't originate it. You just become a contact point, remember, the intersection for that information, because it already exists. And that gets into a whole bunch of things from remote viewing to Tesla and everybody else. So
we just have a built-in antenna or receiver to access.
Right. Yeah. Right. And remember, when we were younger, we just had local stations, 3 of them. And we went off the air at midnight. And that's not true anymore. And that gets into the fact that in the 1900s, there was only 1 or 2 electromagnetic influences on a human being outside, we'll call it. And that was the sun, and maybe we had telegraph. And so if you look at human evolution, we're not geared, like right now, there's about 74 electromagnetic waves propagating through the space I'm in. It's microwave, it's TV, it's radio, it's on and on and on. Well, human beings don't adapt that fast. It takes generations to adapt to that. And so the discontinuity that occurs, the withdrawal, the non-participation in those fields, that information, results in a certain amount of apathy. And I think that's kind of what we see around the world. We've been hit with so much information. And remember, in the 60s, information came from a book or a couple hours of TV. And now it's we're trying to up our operating speed, is what I call it. So, right? And there's ways to do that.
Yeah, I was about to ask you. Let's get into some of those methods.
Well, one of them is kind of like we call a hierarchical assignment. Is why is that important to you? Okay. I mean, if you take all of Facebook and Twitter and whatever, all the others, Instagram, whatever, and you look at that information, you say, why is it important? One of my favorites, there was a guy that said, well, I've studied UFOs for 25 years. And I said, and I know all these people. It was going on and on and on. And at the end of it, I go, has that made you a better person? Have you benefited from that? I know it's given you things to talk about and relate to people. And, people don't use some sort of base level, does this benefit me, right? Considering the amount of time I've spent on it. Because if you spend an hour a day for 3 years straight, you're going to be more knowledgeable than the typical PhD out there on any specific subject. And so 4 hours a day of interacting with your iPhone is actually not going to produce that change, right? It's actually a stagnation is what I call it. So if that makes sense. So you can learn all that through meditation. Martial arts is a better teacher of it. I've studied and taught Kung Fu for about 40 years because the exercises are meant to develop skills other than physical. And the physical, the non-physical, the intuitive, is a much better tool to interact with the world.
Right.
And so there was,
and those can offer methods that will counteract these negative frequencies and energies that are surrounding us, and possibly allow us to have access to those frequencies and realms that we can't perceive.
Yes, one of the things to have, let's say a baby when they're born has a 50-foot energy field, and by the time you're 21, you're down to 3 feet or less, depending on your drugs and alcohol and this, that, and the other. Mm-hmm. So doing pranayama and yoga and meditative type things, martial arts specifically, you can generate that bigger energy field again. Now, some people are born with it automatically. We call them charismatics, and people want to be around them. We call them energy vampires. The current language is called them followers. So because they want energy you have that they don't. You have more energy, and so that's the reason they want to be around you. You think it's because you're good looking or something, and it's not true. The universe really is an energy universe, and everything goes on as an energy exchange. I call them energy equations. So to be around somebody, to eat something, to engage in conversation is an equation, and you will either benefit or be drained by it, plus or minus. It's the same thing for diet. It's the same thing for basically everything, right? Now, how interactive? Well, if you can clear a 9-foot energy field, you're basically going to be unaffected by colds, flu, a whole bunch of things. Even if you were to participate in that, you would recover faster than somebody had no energy field or a 1-foot energy field. So if you had a skill, having a big energy field out to 30, 40 feet becomes a real game changer. Now, if you control that space, think of it that way. My consciousness inhabits or holds space. Well, that means it's denied to entities, spirit attachments, demons, Djinn, non-local conscious. It goes on forever. And the reason I know it, one of my yoga teachers did a yoga retreat one time. And he said, I'm going to show you something. And there are 400 people there, and he controlled the space. And what that meant was, everything that was attached to you, your parents, your grandparents, any kind of entities or demons or whatever you want to call it, he basically held in abeyance. He held them out of our field for about a minute to 2 minutes. And it was the most phenomenal thing in the world. It's literally like being a lower gravity, right? You just felt like, wow, you felt expansive, okay? And at the end of the time, he collapsed the field, and it was a pretty day. And immediately there was like a thunderclap and lightning and hailstorm and everything else as that field collapsed back in. So quantum physics, field collapse. Every moment represents quantum collapse. And so now we get to a really important thing. The world is perfect at every given moment. Quantum physics tells us that by quantum collapse. If it could have been different, it would have been different. So it can only go from perfection to perfection, no matter how much people don't like that idea. Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
So, but it does give you back to a baseline. It gives you a place to start. So at any given point in your life, you can start. That's the most important thing. You can start by applying yourself to any kind of discipline or information or pursuit that will result in not just you being better, but then I call it not being a burden on the universe, is you then have the ability to help others. So is all it is making sense?
Yes, I love it. I want to get your thoughts on a sort of spiritual, I don't want to say argument, but two different schools of belief. One is that we are able to access other forms of life through the universe by space travel and travel to planets. The other one is that the real universe is the innerverse, and it's basically for us to access through ourselves, and it is the realms that surround us at all times that we can't perceive. And I want to get your thoughts on that. Do you believe that there is life outside of our planet and the universe in the traditional sense, or do you think it is more of layers and layers of reality?
Yes. Both and. When you do remote viewing or what I call go surfing the universe, the field, you come across information sets. This gets into set theory, and a book I've been working on for 5 years called Proximate Reality. Your reality is very limited. It's you don't exist in Dallas, Texas at the moment, right? So we want to provide a benefit to people. Let's say I'm in Oklahoma and head to Dallas. When I start, I'm, let's say, 99% in Oklahoma and 1% in Dallas. But there's a quantum switch that occurs some point along that journey where I'm basically 99% in Dallas and only 1% in Oklahoma, let's say. And that occurs at like maybe 10 or 20% into the trip. It doesn't occur like where it flips over and I'm immediately in Dallas. Does that make sense?
Right.
So what happens is my consciousness has already occupied the space of Dallas, we'll call it, where I'm going. And when I discovered this, I always play with things. I discovered that one of the things that happens when you travel, like on a motorcycle, car, or jet plane, your energy field streams out behind you. And when you get to wherever you're going, you have what's called jet lag, right? Everybody's familiar with it. So one of the things I discovered is I could project my energy field ahead of me, not behind me. Take it, project it ahead of me, go ahead and put it in Dallas. And when I arrive in Dallas, guess what? I've just caught up to myself and I have no jet lag. So I fly all over the world. I don't have jet lag, right? Now, how do you do that? It's just a matter of practicing, thinking about yourself, thinking about your energy field, and going ahead and placing it somewhere else. We call it place your consciousness on somebody or something. That's quantum physics, because you start having an influence on that. You start having a presence. And so there's something for people that fly. You can, like I say, try that and work at it. You'll be surprised. You get to a long trip and you're not tired. Right. So.
Right. Now, I want to get to some of the other techniques that you were mentioning, one of them Kundalini Yoga. But something else that caught my ear, you mentioned the Djinn, and I've heard these entities spoken about a couple of times on my show from different guests, and I want to get your understanding of what these are.
Non-local consciousness, okay? Non-local. Remember Dallas? It doesn't exist. Well, it exists as an identifier, as a location. And this is where an intersection becomes better information identification than dimension, okay? So when you were saying earlier, like, are there physical beings? Yes, there's physical beings out in the universe. Are there beings that exist in what we would call a non-material universe? Yes, okay? So the Djinn operate in a non-material universe. So does the astral, lower astral. Like I said, if you go through the esoteric texts, you can find millions of them Tiger's Fang by Siri Paul Twitchell listed, I think, 4,000 of them. Domains, universes, kingdoms. And we have that language come through us with elves and, all these different, the fairies, the little people in Native American language as existing, but they don't exactly exist in our reality. And so this is getting wrapped around that Dallas doesn't exist unless you're in Dallas, okay? Local reality. So does Djinn operate as an operating conscious? Well, if you exist for hundreds or thousands of years instead of our 70, which is restriction, then you might develop the skill to be interactive, not just in a non-material fashion, but in a material fashion. And of course, all those interactions we have determined as being demonic for the most part. Although we sit around and talk about the reciprocal, which is angels. Okay. So, and all of them are ascribed to have certain powers. Well, power is just the ability to focus energy. When you can focus energy, if you develop that skill, or if you become what I call mono-minded, then if you die, you can still, knock on wood around, people you've been related to, or appear as an apparition or things like that. So an apparition, if we look at it like a Djinn, is not exactly physical, but they're not exactly non-physical. What they become is you become interactive, okay? So there's people that are more interactive than others. We call them, psychics. We call them seance people. This has been going on for thousands of years. It's just that when science came along and became the new religion, we got rid of the old religions. We got rid of the old religions that said that somebody had schizophrenia had entities, right? They had spirits in them, and there would be, like in the Native American Navajo, have a blessing way, have some way to get that out of that person, to break that connection. And I'll put it in modern terms. If you've ever been married and divorced, you might need to break that connection.
Now, do you think that these outside influences that we were talking about earlier, like different harmful frequencies, and not only that, substances, drugs can actually attract some of these entities?
Well, actually, what they do is open you up. So if you look at like a 9-foot energy field as a sphere, what if it has an opening in it? What if you've done marijuana, hard drugs, this, that, and the other, knocked in the head, high fevers? All those represent openings that allow that information or energy to come into you. Okay. And people like, I love things like ayahuasca, right? It's like when that first started as a craze, I got calls from London to Europe, all over the world going, help. Because once you get in and open up something like that, you don't have the information, energy, education, ability to deal with it. And of course, that's one of the things I was trained in. So I'm able to help those people that open up a connection, right? Think about having a ghost in your house. I get rid of them. I used to have a nice little business of de-ghosting houses because all it means is something else is living in that space. Well, now we go back to a human being. How many things are living in your space, right? Are you a mini-me, your mom or dad, right? That's your mom or dad living in you or through you. And, if you're made to be Chris, then I want you to be Chris, 100%. No entities, no spirit, no connections, right? Zero. Right. And now you're in an energy state where you can say, hey, I can actually benefit myself at this point. You can increase your energy. You can increase your presence of being Chris. And at that point, you're able to influence or connect with other people in a much more energetic way, we'll just say. Right. Like I said, the language is trying to invent the language of it. That's why we borrow cultural appropriation, quantum physics, other things, right? So
Would you consider these? This is kind of a two-part question. Would you consider these part of what is considered source or creation or God? And what is your idea of what source is?
Remember that I use the field definition: all information, all energy, all consciousness. Right? When you separate it, and that's a human thing to pigeonhole, to put in a box. As soon as you identify a thing, you have limited the amount of information available to you about that subject. It does. I know this gets really entangled, right? But so if you say God, I say which one? There's been presently on the planet, there's about 4,031 of them, I think, last time I checked. Okay. So, but everybody knows what they're talking about. It's just that you can stand next to another person and they do not have the same exact information. That's what it amounts to. So, and of course, the last time we talked, that's where I said belief is insufficient, right? Knowing this as an absolute. So, without getting into rock and roll, so knowing God would become more important than my God, is what I call it. Right? So
in a way, they are a separation from that energy field.
Yeah, what you're doing is identifying with something outside you again. Mm-hmm. One of the meditations, and is in Kriya Yoga, is God and me and God are one. So to identify yourself as God becomes egotistical, unless you're running for political office. But it's but it's a way to eliminate the separation that occurs. And what it gives way to is what I call hierarchical dominance, right? In this case, spiritual. And so to recognize that which is above you is what I call arbitrary. It's a better language than above is beyond. So now, beyond in which direction? Well, direction goes away, and instead we become what we call either inclusive or exclusive of that information, that person, that identity, those events. Like I said, it takes a long time to go through all of it.
Yeah,
but
no, I get it.
So when you deal with gods, the original language was gods were the intersection with humans, and then there were lords that were above gods, and then there were kings that were above lords. You see, so so you say God bless you, and then you say Lord bless me, and then you say King gives me permission to be blessed, I guess.
Right.
So you see all this as remnants throughout our society, because society has changed to where God played an important part, let's say in the year 1000, 11, 12, 13, 14. And then the Renaissance became, things started shifting away from what I call the non-material, right? So that's where we get our current religion, which is called science, right?
Yes.
Right? Believe the science. Oh my goodness.
Right. Yeah.
Trust it. Well, trust means that you're basically lazy. Is the way I look at it. Not willing to hear it.
100%.
But those are some ideas. And again, what you think about it and how you feel about it's not reality. The reality of what I just said is maybe the truth, but it doesn't require you to have an emotional response or anything. It's just something that you can play with. And I think that's one of the things that appears to be lost is what I call a sense of humor and the willingness to play with an idea, right? And if you can play with it, you can take it and turn it around, look it upside down, see it, and eventually you can come to some idea of whether or not that was fun. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, right? That seems like open discussion and agreeing to disagree is a lost art, you know?
Yes, yes. Remember, what you think about it and how you feel about it's not reality. So,
Yes.
so reality can be played with. That's what we're getting at. Can you stand up and become interactive with reality? Well, here you go with all these spiritual help people and telling you can manifest reality, right?
I was just about to get into what you consider manifestation while we're
Okay.
going into these realms here.
So basically, it's not true. It sounds good. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And pay me $400 and I'll teach you can manifest reality. And of course, it doesn't happen. And the reason is in quantum physics, we get into a very simple thing. Is what you're trying to manifest or achieve available? A very simple question, right? You're in the middle of the desert and I'm going to manifest ice cream. No, you're not. it's unavailable to you. You see what I mean? And that's just one of the aspects, is what I call it, of manifestation, right? Is, do you have enough energy? Can you apply that energy as a force, right, in order to shape reality? Well, if you can, first of all, I'd love to meet you, right? Because I've found very few people that are able to do that. One of them was a Gnostic Christian mystic. I mean, this boy was good, right? He could literally manifest things, but he did it in a very specific area, and that was with plants. He could make plants grow to 10 feet tall, you know? Wow. And I've seen this firsthand. So that's an application. If you see healers, I don't think they're really manifesting so much as they're unmanifesting that which has been given to you or you participate in. If you have an illness, then the extra energy allows you to recover faster. So go back to pharmaceuticals. Let me get this straight. I take this little bitty pill, and this little bitty pill is able to basically influence 250 pounds of handsomeness, right? You know, in a way that makes me healthier. And so if you just write down those 3 or 4 things I said and run through it a bunch of times in your head, and you go, there isn't any way possible that that's true, right? Without the participation of my own consciousness to think I'm going to be better. Okay. So that is manifesting. Okay. Right. Using something outside you as a catalyst, as an influence. And so then God serves a purpose. Then pharmaceuticals serve a purpose. So we don't have to demonize all of it when we understand the relationship. Okay. So.
Right. Now, that does, yeah. Now, you were mentioning, unfortunately, the spiritual community waters have been muddied a bit by just people looking for monetary gain or notoriety and things of this nature, and they're just throwing all kind of weird stuff out there. Well, one of the things you mentioned earlier was Kundalini yoga, and I know there's this, of course, a huge woo-woo stigma with yoga in general, and then when you add terms like Kundalini, where a lot of people might not have a great understanding of what this means, it may get lost in understanding sometimes between a lot of people who are trying to understand this. But what is your understanding of Kundalini and Kundalini yoga?
Okay. I first started in the early 70s, started teaching around 73 or 4. And I've taught Kundalini yoga basically ever since. I used to have for many years, almost a decade, I taught 3 times a week. Okay. The reason I taught it because it worked for me. that's everybody all do this, do that. Remember, like the diets, if it worked for you, great, but it doesn't mean it works for everybody. Okay. So that's the first thing, is there's no perfection in like doing this as opposed to doing that. There's no cachet of like, oh, I do Kundalini yoga, I do Iyengar yoga, I do Kriya yoga, I do, there's dozens literally of yoga. Okay. Kundalini yoga is what we call 8 limbs all combined. It's basically all yogas experienced in one set of exercises or meditations. So if you spent, say, 2.5 hours in hatha yoga, body postures, Baptiste taught it. There's a bunch of people that taught hatha yoga. But when you start applying a focus, a consciousness, a mantra, a breathing, pranayama, focus is Raja Yoga, you combine it, you get a much different experience. And this is one of the things I was talking about, like, you're not able to hold a thought. One of the exercises I give is real simple. Hold one thought for 1 minute. It's almost impossible unless you do some sort of meditation or training like that. And so the idea of Kundalini Yoga is you overload all your senses to the point that you withdraw into the inner self or into the true self. And here we go, God consciousness, the whole thing. But it works. I paint, I make paintings, and somebody made fun of me one time, like, what are you doing? Well, I was doing a drawing, a painting, and on my lap. And I was listening to the radio, watching TV, and reading a book all at the same time. So what was I doing? I was overloading my subconscious, overloading my unconscious, to the point that self-expression was the only thing left open for me to move, the direction to move in. We see it in every, I'll call them avatars, but in this case, Bach, Beethoven, Van Gogh, whatever. They become so overloaded. And most people did that through drugs or alcohol, or through psychedelics. They're all through our history, okay? And the references are a little bit obscure, but it was the same thing. It was to free the consciousness to express itself. And like the book review I did on Gravity University on Asimov, is the biggest crisis or whatever that affects us today is a lack of imagination and the willingness to accept somebody else's, version of reality. Mm-hmm. And so if you're really going to be an avatar to yourself, create your own dang reality, right? But do it by eliminating the accumulation of programming, influences, mom, dad, everybody you're connected to, all of society. And when you do all that, then we're going to call that paraphysics. That's my definition of it. It's kind of like parapsychology, or the idea that there's things outside of us. Yes. But if you eliminate all those, you have an expansive ability and room to express yourself in ways that haven't been done before. And to me, that is true alchemy. That is a true changing of the self, right? And Kundalini Yoga represents what I call a fast way to get there. But you can go too fast. It's like anything else, right? It's like in Kung Fu. There's a deep spirituality in it. But you have to go through 6 years of physical training for they'll even start teaching you that. They rarely even refer to it. And my teacher said, like, oh yeah, that's a 40-year program after the 6 years.
Jeez.
And I go,
wow.
I didn't know I signed up for that. But 3 of my teachers in LA, one day I met with them, and I was 50 years old. And one of them reached over and patted me on the shoulder and said, we're proud of you. You're better than we were at 50. And so sometimes people say, what's your credentials? I go, right there. That's my credentials. You see what I mean? Yeah. That I persevered for that length of time to be able to explore the martial arts in a way that included spirituality, life, reality. I mean, on and on and on. Because once you develop the skill set of being yourself, then the whole world is open to you. Okay.
Now,
So
you said that you can go too fast with Kundalini Yoga. Now, I've
right.
heard that people who have had an experience with something that they call Kundalini energy have had serious injuries because they
Yeah.
had kind of unlocked this and experienced this when they weren't ready. Could you talk about
Yes.
how does that happen, and what exactly is this energy, and how does it manifest?
Okay. You are an intersection of ever how many dimensions, interactions, whatever you want to, right? Uh, if you take all that, one of the things that Kundalini Yoga does that other yogas don't do, except Kriya Yoga, and there's some secret martial arts stuff that teach it also, and that is you develop your nervous system. So if you take a human being and say, well, they operate off a certain voltage, we'll just pick a number, 36 volts, let's say, along your spine. Well, what if you had 50 volts or 100 volts? Well, it's like a magnet. As the energy spirals up, it creates an energy field. We know that. That's standard science. And so the more energy you generate along your spine, the more rotation you get and the bigger field you get. So that's what a person that has 40, 50-foot energy field. Now, or 100 feet, you can have 100, 400, it just keeps going. So if you don't have the nervous system, you won't be able to handle the energy flow. Now, historically, we call that people that went into a trance state or fell down or went into screaming fits or whatever, because the energy inflow was too much, okay? So Kundalini Yoga, Kriya Yoga, developed the nervous system to be able to handle an additional voltage. Okay, and that's one of the things that happened to me when I was about 35, is that I studied it and learned a way to expand the amount of energy I could flow through myself, and even to flow around me, even a much greater. Well, that energy becomes available to other people when I work on them. Okay. But if you don't have the nervous system to handle the energy flow, think about you just overloaded the wiring. Okay. So that's what they call a Kundalini rising experience. And in the 70s, I used to get calls from all over the world. People would get in trouble. And they knew I could fix it because I could learn to dampen down that energy in another person, just like you can learn to increase it in another person. Okay. So back to ayahuasca, it's the same thing. What if you opened up a channel of information that you're not prepared to deal with? So that it becomes, you forced it. And anytime you force something, there's going to be a consequence, we say it. Okay.
Right.
So there is a certain amount of contemplation before you engage in any kind of psychedelics or any kind of martial arts or anything. It's like, let me try this on, but don't let me be a fanatic and go at it, like I did. Because I would do it, and sometimes I'd pass out for 3 or 4 hours straight after one of the classes because I had to reintegrate. Right. So all experiences: integration, synchronization, congruency. Integration, synchronization, congruency. So all experiences have to go through that cycle and through that process for you to benefit from that experience. Okay.
Now, when you're doing energy work on people, could you tell us about some of the techniques and methods you're doing and what is actually occurring during your sessions?
Science loves anecdotal information. Not. So, and yet if you get right down to it, that's all we have. I only have the experiences I've had. Okay. And well, those are anecdotal. They're non-scientific. Yes. What's your point? Right. Because they represent life. They don't fall under the idea of science. Right. They're non-repeatable. Okay. The kiss of your first girlfriend or whatever is non-repeatable. Okay. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. Doesn't mean there wasn't some hormonal shift and this, that, and the other that occurred. So one day I decided I would teach a class in this. And I've done that over the years, and I've found out that basically there are very few people interested in what I call healing others. They may say they do, but it's actually a job. It's actually something you have to work at. And so as soon as it becomes work, same thing as spirituality. It's like it becomes work. Conscious becomes work. And it's like, can't you give me a pill? So, right. And of course, then comes the perversion, yoga with goats, yoga with beer, yoga. I mean, it was considered a spiritual science. I'm getting ready to do a book review on Yogananda, autobiography of a yogi. But anyway, to your question, one day I decided to teach a class in it. I asked if people were interested. And there were about 14 people that were interested in the class. Okay. So on a Tuesday night, show up and we'll go through all this. And one of them was an 8-year-old. And she had told her mother that she was coming to my yoga classes. I don't even remember how she found out, but heard her mother, somebody talking about it. And so she said, I'm coming to the, learning how to heal class, right? I call it creative energetic health because it's creative and it's energetic. And those are the two requirements if you're going to create reality, by the way. And imagination deals in that anyway, to get back to it. I lined everybody up and I said, okay, who has a problem? Who has a pain in their body? And one of the ladies goes, well, my knee hurts. And so I turned to one of the other people and I go, fix it. And they go, how do I do that? And I go, any way you want to. You see what I mean? Remember that we're limited only by imagination and by authority that have told us we can't do things, right? And if you don't know you can't do it, back to Tesla and everybody else, you'd be surprised at what all you can do, what all effect you can have. And so I told the person, it's like there has to be a kinetic action. Like if I have a thought about somebody and I reach over and call them on the phone, that's a kinetic action. That's one of the things I went through with Dr. Bill Tiller, is that you can affect things in a long distance way as long as there's a kinetic movement that is involved in it. And that gets into a whole long thing about why that's true. But so I said, you can raise your hand, you can wave, you can throw it away, I don't care what you do, right? But do it without touching. And so the person that was doing the healing waved their hands around and I said, how's your knee feel? And she goes, it feels different, right? So why? Because all energy is interactive. That's it. All thoughts, energy, interactive. So we went around and somebody said, well, what about genetics? And I said, well, genetics is just energy flowing through a template. So you should be able to change it. And so they said, what do you mean? I said, well, I have brown eyes. And so I turned to the 8-year-old and I said, change my eyes to green, right? And everybody's sitting around a table. And so she sat up straight, took one deep breath, and everybody moved back from the table like this, right? Because we're sensitive to that kind of energy. We're sensitive to that expansion of our energy field to include access to the field and access to more information, energy we ever thought possible. She changed my eye color to green.
No.
Now, opened my eyes and everybody went, whoa, right? Now, here's a trick. I'm an artist. It totally shifted how I saw colors in the room. I mean, so I knew that there had to be a physical difference going on because of the color shifts, right? And I'm very sensitive to color shifts, right? So as an artist. And and then I was praying. I said, now change them back. So it's like you play with this stuff, but you ask permission and you want to make sure
that brings me to how harmful can others' energies and intentions be towards ours, and how much can it affect our reality?
Like a lot or
That's
not.
Crazy.
You got it? A lot or not. The more you're yourself, the less you're influenced by it. Think about people trying to get you to vote for somebody. That's like, no, right? Or yes. But you, like in this case, I was open to it. I had stated my intention. They were able to make the shift. How did they do it? I don't know. I had my eyes closed. Later, she just waved her hand, right? And so the main thing is she had never been told she couldn't do it. Okay. So we can alter gene expression. It doesn't have to be through a CRISPR-Cas9 machine. Okay. And I have seen it and done it upon occasion, but I cannot say I've done it every time because we have what we call momentum in our life. Right. And we have karma, we have connections, we have equations is language I use. Okay. Now, another one came to class, again, a young one. And she said, I want to learn what you do. And I said, okay, just sit here after class and I'll tell you a few things. I said, so what's going on? She said her grandmother had high blood pressure. And I go, look, just find her blood pressure. And then when you find it, just lower it, right? Very simple. So away she goes. She comes back and goes, I did that. I said, congratulations. Now her grandmother goes in the hospital for high blood pressure. And the doctor comes in and goes, it's like 180, 190, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And he goes out the door. The little girl goes to her grandmother, lowers it down. Doctor comes back in and goes, it's perfectly normal. He goes, I don't understand it. The little girl goes, and he goes, don't do that. Do you see what I mean? Don't do that.
Oh, man.
Children's Hospital had one of my clients, 5-year-old, all kinds of genetic problems. And she was in there with her heart rate would go way up and this, that, and the other. And I walked over to her bed, heart rate 212, right? The doctors come in, took one look and walked away. And I always love Children's Hospital, Oklahoma City. I said, I did that. And they go, we want to talk to you. And I go, here's my phone number. Next day, we don't want to talk to you. Don't ever call us again. Right?
Yes.
What's funny about it, National Institute of Health, same thing. CDC, same thing. I mean, I've been interviewed and asked questions, and then all of a sudden they don't want anything to do with me. Yeah. Because everybody has the ability to influence their own health and well-being to some degree. And that some degree becomes that part of, if it's available. And all these people telling you can do all this stuff is not true unless you can. And so everybody can practice something. And that's why I don't limit it to just yoga. You can study Reiki, you can study acupuncture, anything that involves the energetics of the human body. You can study in a way that allows you to influence yourself. And if you can influence yourself, you can influence others, in a positive way. So.
Right on. 100%, man. That's a perfect note to end on. Randy, this was fantastic for the audience that is interested in finding out more about you. And if you have anything interesting that you're working on, go ahead and let us know.
Okay. Yeah. These are things that occupy. It's interesting. People come to me for help in mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, psychic, all that. And it all has a universal basis. And that is energy, information, and consciousness. And when you combine those in yourself, you have the greatest ability to influence the universe, yourself, your family, your work. And the only factor is what we call a limitation of imagination. And so everybody, I'd encourage to read science fiction. But I'm on the internet, YouTube and all that stuff. Randy Veitenheimer, Energy Doctor, spelled with a K, is another one. Creative Energetic Health is just a very simple idea that through imagination, creativity, and energy, you make changes. And that is true manifestation or whatever. So, and get busy. In 40 years, you can be really good.
Hey, there you go. Something to look forward to. Randy, this was fantastic.
Yeah,
man, and we'll have to definitely do this sooner again in the future. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening, and we will talk again tomorrow. We'll see y'all all then.